Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder how your brain keeps track of where things are, even when you move your eyes? This new study might just give us some fascinating clues. Imagine you are looking around the room. You see a book on the table, a lamp on the floor, and a picture on the wall. Even if you quickly glance from the book to the lamp, your brain knows the book is still on the table and the lamp is still on the floor. This ability to know where things are in the world a consistent way, no matter where you are looking, is called spatiotopic localization. But here is the fascinating part. Your brain also has to figure out how to bind the identity of an object, like it is a book, to its location. And that is where things get a bit tricky. Scientists have been debating for a while about which map your brain uses for this binding. Is it an eye-centered map called Retinotopic or a world-centered map called Spatiotopic? Most of the time, it seems like our brain prefers the eye-centered Retinotopic map for object location binding. But what if we could help our brain use that more useful world-centered spatiotopic map? That is exactly what this study set out to explore. They wanted to see if something familiar in our environment, something we use every day without thinking, could help our brain make this crucial connection. That familiar thing, visual landmarks, think of those distinctive buildings, street signs, or even just the corners of a room. These are the visual cues that help us navigate and understand our surroundings. Previous research has shown that these landmarks are super helpful for knowing where things are in the world, especially when you are moving around. But could they also help your brain bind object identity to object location in that useful, world-centered way? That was the big question. So, how did they test this? The researchers designed two clever experiments. In both, participants looked at a screen and performed specific eye movements called saccades. Think of these as quick jumps of your eyes from one point to another. In the first experiment, which they called the static context, participants would look at a shape, then their eyes would jump to a new spot, and then they'd see a second shape. They had to do two main things. First, there was a spatiotopic localization task. Here, they were asked to remember where the first shape appeared in the world after their eye movement. They'd have to point to that original location as accurately as possible. This task was all about precisely remembering location. Then, they did an identity judgment task. This is where the object location binding magic, or lack thereof, would be revealed. In this task, they saw two shapes one after another, with an eye movement in between. After seeing both, they had to say if the two shapes were the same or different. Now, here is the trick. The location of the shapes was supposed to be irrelevant. But a known phenomenon called the spatial congruency bias shows that people are more likely to incorrectly say two different shapes are the same if they were presented in the same location. This bias acts as a measure of how strongly object identity is bound to location. Now they divided these tasks into two conditions. One where the screen had a simple background, and another where a grid of lines was added to the background. These were the visual landmarks. What did they find in this static situation for the localization task? Where remembering the exact spot was key, the landmarks totally helped. Participants were much better at pinpointing the original location when the landmarks were there. This was pretty much what they expected. But when it came to the object location binding part, the identity judgment task, the landmarks didn't make a difference. The spatial congruency bias, that tendency to think two different shapes are the same if they appeared in the same spot, was still purely based on the eye-centered retinotopic map. It didn't shift to the world-centered spatiotopic map, even with the landmarks present. So, in this static world, landmarks were good for knowing where things are, but not for binding what they are to where they are in a world-centered way. This led them to wonder maybe the static environment wasn't dynamic enough. Our real world is constantly changing and our eyes are always moving. So, they designed a second experiment to make things more lively. In experiment 2, they introduced more eye movements. Not only did participants make the eye jump between stimuli, but they were also cued to make little eye movements, while the shapes were actually on the screen. Imagine trying to read a sign while your eyes were doing a little dance. This created a much more dynamic, busy visual experience. And guess what happened in this more dynamic setting? In the localization task, landmarks still boosted performance, just like before. But in the identity judgment task, where they were looking for that object location binding across eye movements, something changed. When the landmarks were present in this dynamic context, participants did show a spatiotopic spatial congruency bias. Their brain was actually starting to bind the object's identity to its world-centered location. This was only the case when landmarks were present. Without them, the bias remained retinotopic. This is a really key finding. It seems like landmarks alone aren't enough to push object location binding into that more useful spatiotopic reference frame. But when you combine landmarks with a more dynamic environment where your eyes are moving during the viewing of the objects, then those landmarks become powerful tools. So what does this all mean? Well, it tells us that our brain's ability to keep things stable as we move our eyes isn't just a simple switch. It is a complex process that can be influenced by the context. Visual landmarks seem to play a role, but their influence on object location binding, that crucial link between what something is and where it is, really shines through when the environment is more dynamic and your eyes are actively engaged. It is like landmarks provide a stable anchor, but you need a bit of movement around that anchor to actually start using it for that higher level binding task. The researchers also point out that this doesn't mean improved localization is the reason for the binding effect. The benefit to localization was there in both experiments, but the binding effect only appeared in the dynamic landmark present condition. This dissociation suggests that it is not just about knowing where things are, but about how your brain is processing spatial information across eye movements that truly matters for this binding to become spatiotopic. This research is super interesting because it highlights how naturalistic cues, like landmarks, can work together with other factors like the dynamic nature of our vision to create that seamless experience of a stable world. It also opens up a lot of questions. What if landmarks were made more important to the task? What about even richer environments? Future research will likely dive deeper into the brain's mechanisms for this and explore how different types of dynamic contexts might further influence our perception. Ultimately, this study gives us a peek into the sophisticated ways our brain maintains visual stability. It shows that our everyday environment with its familiar landmarks can play a more active role in how we perceive and interact with the world around us, especially when we're on the move. It's a great reminder that the way we see the world is incredibly sophisticated, and scientists are constantly uncovering the amazing tricks our brains play to let us navigate it all so smoothly. What do you think of these findings? Does it change how you think about your own visual experience? Let me know in the comments below. If you found this breakdown helpful, please give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab for more science explained, simply, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive. Thanks for watching and see you next time.